So today I'm going to be talking about media storage and organization for creators. This is a companion piece to the previous video. I'll try to link that up here or down below. That kind of goes into detail about the different types of storage. This is going to go into detail about how to organize files and some of the best practices around that and some of the things that we learned over the years. There's also going to be a post at benandkayla.com, so if you're interested in more detailed explanation of some of the things that I described today, I would take a look at benandkayla.com for that little blog post. I'll also link that down below. Just a quick disclaimer, this is not paid. Nobody asked us to make this video. The reality is, this is just what works best for us. So this is not something that you have to take as, the only way to do it. Just understand that this is something that has worked really well for us, something that I've learned over the past, year and a half of starting YouTube. And you're probably asking the question, why do you care about this so much? And, why should we listen to you? Really, you don't have to, but my day job, I work in IT. I work on things like disaster recovery, and I work on things like how to store files and the best practices around storing files. That's why I care about this so much. So I'm sure you're curious, what are the different types of storage? So these are like primary recording media. These are SD cards that go into cameras. These are SSDs or mini SSDs. Now these are kind of a hybrid. These are kind of in between SD cards and storage drives. These are actually a recording media, and these can be taken as input, but they're also used as a storage place to kind of keep archived media. And then these are kind of what most, YouTube or vloggers are used to. These are external SSDs. There's also external hard drives. Like I said in the previous video, definitely go with SSDs, significantly more reliable. All right, there's one more thing. This is a NAS. This is actually our old NAS. That's why I use it as a prop, because if this was our real NAS, I definitely wouldn't be moving it around this much. But this is a hard drive. They're 3.5 inches tall. I don't know, about so big. These have spinning disks inside of them. So one of the big things to be careful about with these is shaking it around. Like I mentioned, these are our old ones. If this was our real stuff, I don't know if I'd be moving them around this much. But as you can see in the NAS, there's multiple of them. These drives are what's in a RAID array. They're individually backed up, but if you want to know more about that, go check out our old video. All right. So I guess the most common question that I get about storage is, how can you detect if it's failing? How do you know if something's going wrong? Everybody's had that experience where they've plugged something in, they've expected their file to be there, and their file is corrupt. There's kind of a few ways to do that. One of those is if you have a hard drive or you have a little SSD like this, they have a thing called Smart, which actually kind of monitors their lifespan and monitors how long that they're expected to last, how many writes, how many reads that you've done. It kind of looks for things like temperature changes or anything like that, common indicators of failure. That's a great tool to use. A lot of times they're built into drives. Now, some drives, if they're cheap, they may not have this feature. You may not be able to find out if your drive's suddenly going to fail. You can look up things on the internet. I'll try to put links in our blog post about it, but it's called SMART, Smart. The other way to do it is actually by checking files. So this is a common thing called hashing. So it's a popular thing in security for validating files and making sure that they have not changed unexpectedly. This is why backing up is important. So if you've hashed your files, you'll know if they've changed unexpectedly. Now, that doesn't really help you in recovering the file. You'll just know that it's corrupted. This is why backups are important. This is why I recommend storing the data on at least 2 things, or even keeping the original media if you can, especially on like really important shoots if you've got client work and stuff like that. If you can keep the original media and then keep it stored on those 2 things or on your NAS, that's what actually, kind of allows you to recover from that. Because if you check the hash on this and it's different than what you expected, well, then just go check your other media. If it's good, then you're good to go. This is also why modern cameras have 2 recording slots. All the new Sonys, like the Sony a7S III or the Sony a1, they have 2 spots to record media to. You can actually do simultaneous recording. I think that's kind of overkill for most YouTube things. It's overkill for us personally. But if you do have like really important client work or you're on $1 million shoot, I would definitely set something to simultaneous recording, and you can record to both of those. All right, so what is hashing? Well, Hashing is basically an executive summary of whatever file that you have, and it creates an identifier. It's basically the way to make sure that the file has not changed. Any one small text change, even if you were to change a single character in an entire paper that you wrote, the hash would be significantly different. That's actually what makes them valuable. The way they do this is actually using complex mathematical algorithms. I don't think that's important for this video. I think it's just important that most creators know that hashing is something that you can use to make sure that your files are the exact same from the day that you copy them to a drive to the day that you pull them out 30 years later. The hash should be the same regardless of the time between pulling them out. What can hashing be used for? Well, it can be used for showing that the file is complete. When you first store your file, you want to make sure that you copied all of the data off the SD card and copied it all over to your NAS or all over to your external hard drive. And that's why it's important to make sure that it's copied in its entirety. If you look at the file on the SD card and then you compare it to the file that's on your SSD, they should have the exact same hash. That's what makes that hashing algorithm so valuable. It's also important to note that you can't go backwards from having a hash to recreating the file. It can basically, it's a one-way thing. It tells you that the file is either there or it's not there. And so that's why it's important to know that. Hashing can also be used to identify files. Like I previously mentioned, each hash ID is supposedly unique, at least if it's a good hashing algorithm and not something with collisions. What are hash collisions? Well, hash collisions are when two completely different files come out to the exact same ID. Now, this is dangerous because when you record one video and you record another video 2 years later, you record one in San Francisco and you record one in New York, completely different people, completely different actors, they should be different. And if you hash them and the hash identifier is the exact same, that's very concerning. That means that two of those files could be confused, especially if you use some sort of archiving system that identifies them based on hash. So that's why there's certain hash algorithms that are very useful, and then there's certain hash algorithms that, if they have a lot of collisions, they may be considered cryptographically unsecure. One thing to note here about cryptographically unsecure, that doesn't mean they're completely useless. That just means that they can't be used for things that require cryptographically secure information, like banking or flight information or anything that you think about life safety. Those are algorithms that need to be cryptographically secure. And I'll mention this a little bit later about one of the programs that I use to back it up. They don't use something that's cryptographically secure, but there has not been a lot of collisions in the algorithm, and basically the IDs that they produce, they're unique enough. All right, so the next thing that I want to talk about is, so how can you transfer files? So there's basically two ways to transfer files. One of those is manually, and then the other way is using an automated program. There's kind of two major pros and cons to each type of transfer. So the manual method, you're using built-in utilities. So this is Finder on Mac or Explorer on Windows, and this is the most common way to copy or move files around. Or using an automated program, something like Hedge or TeraCopy. There's some pros and cons to each one of these. Basically, the pro to the built-in utilities is they're built in. You don't have to install them. You don't have to do anything with them. They're just always there. And if you tell, Control V, Control C, and tell it to copy or paste, and you're good to go. You don't need to think about it too much. The one con of that is there's basically no organization to it. It basically transfers the file from point A to point B, no questions asked. Most of the file transfer stuff today is reliable enough, but there is some things that you should know. I mentioned hashing earlier, and one of the key things about that hashing is that these file transfer things, they don't do any of that. They don't do any verification of the file. What I mean by that is they don't check the source to the destination. They don't check from when it's on the SD card to when it's on your SanDisk. At the end of the day, it might not be the same. So now there is programs out there that will help you transfer these files. So what are the pros and cons to doing this with a program? Well, a program can do a lot of this stuff automated. It can basically take all of the files that are on your SD card from your camera, transfer them over to your SanDisk, your little external SSD that you got. Now, it can also hash at the same time and create a list of those hashes, which basically ensures that that file that was on your SD card is the same as the file that ends up on your SSD or your NAS. It can also reorganize the files, which is something, one of the programs that I use that I'll mention later on, and I'll hopefully give you a quick demo of it, that works great for us. There is a few downsides to this. Now, there is often a cost to this. However, there are some free open source utilities that I've used in the past. They've worked great for what they do. However, the better ones that I've seen, there is a slight cost to them. So I feel like I should be upfront about that. I'm sure you're asking which programs can I use that will help with organization. Now, there's a few programs that I've used in the past, and now there's a new program that I use today. So in the past, I've used programs like TeraCopy, which is mostly a Windows utility. Now they do have a Mac utility, but to be honest, I've had a lot of problems with it, and it's not something that I would recommend, at least for commercial use. I do know that there is also a limitation on it, that it can only be used for private use unless you buy a license. Now, there is another piece of software that I'm sure most photographers and most videographers are familiar with, which is Lightroom. Lightroom is a great piece of software that will create an entire photo catalog for you, but it can also transfer and organize your footage. Today, with Lightroom and Lightroom Cloud, it's something that you should know that if you use Lightroom Cloud, it will mostly transfer all of that to the cloud, and you'll have limited space. If you're like Kayla and I, and you produce a ton of footage, there's a reason I had to buy a 4 terabyte SSD here. Transferring to the cloud really isn't an option unless you got a lot of money. Most of the time, like the Lightroom Cloud that I have now, I've only got about a terabyte of space, so I have to clear it out every so often. But if you use Lightroom Classic, you can organize your files, and you can set it up to kind of move your videos and pictures over and organize them by date, which is absolutely great. It's a very powerful tool. However, it's kind of overkill if you just need to organize your files. So the last one is Hedge. Now, this is a program that I have found in the last year or so, and I've actually found it very useful. I wanted to make a video on this because I actually think it's a very valuable and time-saving tool, because I know personally it saved me hours and hours of, spending time trying to organize my files. I would try to give you a little demo of how I used to do it, but I'm not sure that that would be helpful in this scenario. So I'll try to give you a demo here about how I actually use Hedge. So now I want to talk about the new way that we organize our footage. As I mentioned previously, we used to kind of do it by, day 1, day 2, day 3. That ended up being a disaster, and then copying the entire card. While that did get all of the data off of the footage, it also brought along a bunch of extra folder structure that wasn't really necessary. So I'm going to go ahead and open up our NAS here. We'll go to our 2022, and then we're going to pull up, I think Montana was the first time that we really tried this. As you can see here, it's got the date of each piece of footage that we captured in Montana, or prior to Montana. Each one of these dates is, starts with the month and then the day. And as you noticed before, we have a 2022 footage. I organize by year at the top level, because most of the time, I'm going to go back and I'm going to say, okay, I want something from 2022 or I want something from 2021. So that's why I put that at the top level. So let's go ahead and open up one of these folders here. And then, similar to the other way that we used to organize, I have it by each type of camera that took it. So I have all of the footage for our A1, regardless of the card that took it. Card 1, card 2, doesn't really matter. All of the footage for our A1 goes into that folder. All of the footage for the A7S III, all of the footage for our iPhone, our Insta360, and then anything that I took on the Ninja 5. While the Ninja 5 is probably a duplicate of the A1, it is still a useful thing to have, especially if I want to pull off the ProRes footage from that. So let me go ahead and open up this A1 here, and you can see that I have all of the footage from the A1 in here, and I had it dump everything, including video. I had it also dump the XML files, and then the raw files in here. Now, this is a great way to have, everything from one type of camera right in there. You can do smart folders in here and have it pull out the pictures and videos. Now, in the future, this is the first iteration of the way I organize files. In the future, I'm going to start organizing additionally by file extension. And I want to show you how I do that in Hedge. So over here in Hedge, like I mentioned earlier, I had those transfers running. It would transfer all those files automatically. But you may ask, what do you mean Hedge automatically organizes the footage? Well, this is how we do it. We go into the preferences here, and there's a little tab called Organize. And so I have this set up. I call it the B&K default. And I tell it that, hey, I don't want these JPEGs. I don't want any thumbnails. I don't want any binary files. And I don't want any of these .ind files into my folders. I don't want to save any of that data because none of that matters. I also tell it to completely ignore folders. So that means every folder that's on that SD card is just immediately flattened, which means it ignores any folder structure that is part of the card. and then I tell it to go ahead and create folders in this method. So I have it create the file month dash file day. So that should get me down to that day level. Then I have it get down to the source name. So if I name my SD cards properly, it will automatically pull those. So like the A1, A7S3, Insta360, or the Ninja 5. As you can see, the source name here on the left, Ninja 5, it will automatically transfer that and it will create a folder with that. And then now I have it organized by file extension. So anything that I transfer in should automatically be organized by that. So I'm going to go ahead and open up that test folder. I didn't make everybody else suffer through that. So 2022 into the test. As you can see, it's got our 5.6 in there, and it's got our source, Ninja 5, and then it's got our file type, which is a .mov. All of that data is right there. I can go ahead and play that file, I can review that file, but I have it organized here. So the next thing that I was going to talk about is hashing. And the real value in Hedge is actually this little hash feature. The organization stuff is absolutely wonderful and a time saver, but hashing is really important if you want to archive your footage for a long period of time, and you want to make sure that it stays in the proper condition. So I've got pulled up here, remember the tool that I mentioned earlier was TeraCopy. And I said Terracopy was really great because it actually automatically creates checksums for everything that it transfers, as long as you tell it that's what you want it to do. You know, I've got all of these footage pulled up here with all of the checksum list here, and it's got each little hash and what they're tied to, you know, the file that they're tied to. You know, so these are all, each one of these is a hash that's assigned to the picture that was taken on that date and that time. The other thing that Hedge does is it also keeps track of these transfer logs. So you can open up these transfer logs and kind of see what happened during the transfer. You can see if it failed, if it timed out. As you can see, I actually ended up canceling this process. So it will tell you right here at the beginning, hey, we went ahead and canceled this process. That file actually was not fully transferred. It was canceled during the copy. And then, it didn't reach these files here. But you have a list of files which it failed on. So if you do need to go back and you do need to find out what happened, it's all right here in the log. Now I've just shown you some of the ways that I use to sort and organize my files. But just so you should know that there are other ways to do it. I know that Hollywood and some other studios use things like scene and take and roll number, or even the card number. It's important to know that while there is alternatives, you know, this is what I found that's worked best for us, and this is what I also hope will work well for you. Now that's it for this video. If you like this content, give us a like down below. Additionally, feel free to comment if there's stuff that you want me to go over. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next one.